A database is arguably the most important part of an application because if you really think about it, all of the data and everything you model your application around is going to be stored inside of a database. Now my problem is I don't have a database. I don't even know how to interact with my database through JavaScript with Drizzle ORM, and that's exactly what we're going to try to figure out today here in this episode of Let's Build Our Cooking App. As always, I'm Ethan, or Unknown Coder, your favorite underqualified senior software engineer. Before we actually get into building out our database, let's go ahead and hop into GitHub. I want to show you guys the project board I put together here, and just to show you guys a little bit of a sneak peek of what's going to be coming forward and what we're going to be working on today. Over on GitHub, I put together this super simple board that just has a few little sections here where we're going to be keeping track of everything we're working on. Now, of course, this isn't everything we're going to be working on, and this isn't all of the features that we have. This is just kind of what I can think of for now. We have 14 things, and I'm going to go ahead and add as we continue going on. So some of the things include like learn Drizzle ORM. We definitely need to do that. We need to determine our database schema. We'll be doing that in this episode as well. We need to go ahead and set up our Vercel hosted database. So this one, I'm not worried about the local database because I already have a local instance of PostgreSQL running in Docker, but I'm not as familiar with Vercel setup, so I need to figure that out. And there's something else that I want to try to figure out as well. I think there's a way to game the system to make it so we can have one for preview and for production. That way we can have data in preview to test with. I'm going to go ahead and look into that, and I'll kind of report back on that, as well as set up the environment variable. So we'll need the local database URL, we'll need the preview database URL, so on and so forth. So we need to set all that stuff up. And of course, we need to go ahead and get the Drizzle set up for the app and all that stuff. Basically determining schema and setting up the Drizzle inside the app will kind of go hand in hand. That's kind of what I want to work on today. We'll see what we get to here in this episode. So enough blabbing. I'm going to go ahead and figure out how to do Drizzle ORM. I'm just going to go ahead and do a little bit of a tutorial. I think I saw one by Web Dev Simplified. So let's go and hop into that tutorial, and I'll report back once I've been learned in Drizzle ORM. Now that we got a general idea of how to actually set up our database inside of our NextJS app, we need to go ahead and figure out what we're going to actually make as a database. So I went ahead and put together this ERD diagram. I want to quickly go ahead and go over it. I don't want this to be the focus of the video. I want the focus of the video to be actually working on the database. So let's just quickly go through here. So here we have 4 main database tables. If we go ahead and zoom in here, our first one's going to be users. So this is primarily just going to be, like it says, our users. And then this will also have user types, and it'll also have some followers relationship here. We can go ahead and follow one another, and then we'll also go ahead and connect it to a subscription. That way we can keep track of what type of subscription, whether it's a year, month, whatever, and then that will be determined also by the term type. Then of course we also have our recipes here. So this one will have like things like type, name, image, origin, author, private, author being who created it, so it also has relation to the users table. The type will be something like breakfast, lunch, dinner, so on and so forth. And then of course we also need all of the things for the instructions and the ingredients. So for instructions, that'll be a separate table where we have a unique string of the instruction, and we'll go ahead and relate that with a junction table, recipe, instruction, junction. Same thing with our ingredients. So with the ingredients, we'll have a name and measurement. Again, these will kind of be a unique combination. We'll also have a junction table for the recipe ingredient, and then reuse any ingredients that are the same between different recipes. Finally, we have our cookbook. So we'll have a name, description, private, and then the author. Once again, the author connects to the user. And then again, we need to keep track of all of the recipes inside the cookbook. So to do that, we'll use a junction table once again. That will just keep track of the recipe ID and the cookbook ID that they belong to. And then finally, I want a way to actually like recipes. So again, we'll just have a junction table between the recipe and the users who like them. So this is a pretty simple database schema here. We're going to go ahead and hop into Vim and see if we can't figure this out. First, we need to go ahead and create a new branch to go ahead and create create all of our code, then we need to go ahead and set up the directory structure inside of our project and get to work here. So once I figure out everything I need to do for our database, I'll go ahead and be back with you and share what I did with the code and show you everything is working properly. Good news, everybody. We officially have a database, and in front of us is the actual ERD diagram. The one tutorial that I looked at that was really helpful for like this more advanced database stuff was a person called Syntax over on YouTube. He kind of went into a deep dive on some of the more complicated databases and things like that. So that really helped me out. I'm not sure if all of our relations and everything get set up properly. So it's going to be something that we have to kind of tweak and work with. But let's go ahead and hop into the code and I'll show you guys kind of what I did, how I got this set up, and then kind of what I'm thinking to change to get everything set up for preview and production as well. So here in the code, we'll start out in our database file. So this is more or less basically setting up our connection or the amount of connections that we want. Now, I don't think I need this connection with max non-notice anymore. Now there's a migrate script for you to just run automatically. Then here, we're going to go ahead and just check to see if it's production or not production, so preview or whatever. We can also go ahead and get rid of this console.log. Either we'll have a new database connection or use a global database connection, depending on whichever one we're at. And that's because if you're in preview or local, whatever, the application will be restarting over and over again. So you don't want to make a new connection all the time. Basically, what this will end up doing is kind of make a singleton for our database here. So this is kind of our general database. To use the database, we use like database dot whatever, and I can actually show you. I wanted to make sure everything was working because things were being a little bit finicky. So I'll show you kind of how we use the database. Here, database is that database we set up in that database file. Query means to query it, and then whatever table that you want to query it on. This is not a tutorial. I still have a lot to learn when it comes to Drizzle, but this is kind of like the basic setup. So now let's go ahead and go into our different tables, and I'll show you guys how we set up our schema. So here in the side, we have the schema folder, and we have a file for each one of our tables. And then index just kind of exports all of them. That way we can import them into our database. Because if you did see in database, we're going to build a database based off of our schema. And then all of those schemas are coming from the index. So we have our cookbook recipe table. So this is going to be a junction table where we can connect many recipes to many cookbooks. And also, I don't 100% know if these relations are quote unquote proper. So I might need to come back and kind of figure out how to do this. This one would be how we kind of keep track of all the recipes that go into a cookbook. We have our cookbook table, which has our name, ID, description, private, and then the author. The author is going to relate to this. We need to make sure we export that, so that was a good find. And then also I went ahead and had create and update timestamps just so that we know whenever they are updated and created. We have our followers junction table, which again is going to have just many relationships to users, and we have the ID, followed ID, and follower ID. Our ingredients are going to be pretty simple. We just have a name, and here I had to make a small change. So instead of doing the composite key with name and measurement, you can't reference a composite key here. So what I did instead is I went ahead and just made ID the primary key, but then we have a unique constraint on name and measurement. So then if anyone ever creates a recipe that has a name and measurement that's the same as some others, we'll just go ahead and use that. Next, we have instruction. So again, this is pretty simple, just an ID and a text. I'm not worried about the create timestamps and update timestamps for instructions. Then we have our recipe ingredient junction table here. So again, we're just going to go ahead and have the ID, the recipe ID. So this one, we don't actually need these anymore. We just need the ingredient ID actually. So let me go ahead and fix this. So that's how we kind of do that. And then again, we have our relationship here. That way we can kind of fetch that data along with this. Then we have our recipe and instruction junction. But again, we just have the ID, and then we are keeping track of which recipe and which instruction goes with that recipe. We have a recipe likes table, pretty simple. We have our ID, the recipe, and then the user that liked said recipe. And we just have a junction table here. Our recipe is also fairly simple. So we have our ID, we have our type of recipe, which I'll show you the different types here in a second. Our name, the image, I'm going to use a base64 image. Might not be the best idea, but I don't want to use a bucket or anything. The author is going to reference our user ID, whether or not it's private. By default, that'll just be false. And then we have a create update timestamp, and you can see that we have default on all of this. And this is supposed to help it so that you don't have to wipe your database tables whenever you make changes to any columns, especially whenever you just pushing stuff. So it's just kind of nice to have that. And then we have relations again. So we have a recipe with type and then author. So this is the one I'm not sure if this should be one or if this should be many, or if this should be the other way around and we should actually put the recipe on the other side, because technically a recipe will have one type and a recipe will have one author. So I think this is okay, but we're going to kind of experiment with our relations. We have our recipe types here, pretty simple. ID and type, and then we have our subscriptions. Again, we have a term type, the duration, and then cost and cents. So the term type will be like if it's a year, lifetime, or monthly, and we also have the user for said subscription. And I think we need to put in the term type in here as well. And this basically allows us to do joins and stuff inside of queries inside of our application. So we have our term types. So this is a serial and primary key, or ID and type again. And then we have users. We have our ID. We have first name, last name, email, password, username. I think email and username are unique, and then type, we'll go ahead and reference the user type, so on and so forth. So that's pretty good. Once again, we have our user relation here with type, and then finally we have our user types that just has the ID and the type. So now the last thing that I want to go ahead and do to get everything set up with Vercel, you can only have one free database per like project or whatever. So obviously we can't have a production and a preview database. So what I've seen people do is set up different schemas for different environments. So what I'm probably gonna end up doing is changing this to like cooking app dev. We'll add in some password. So here, this is fine. I'll add the password in for the other environments you won't see. And then instead of like cooking app dev, there should be just cooking app. And then whenever we create our database tables, or in schemas, it'll be based off of which environment we're in. So if we're in the dev environment, it'll be like dev.cookingapp and then database. And then if we're in preview, it'll be like prev.cookingapp.database. And then production will be like prod.database, whatever. So I need to figure out how to do that. I'll set up our Postgres database on Vercel. Once I get everything put to production, we can check on the database and everything. I'll go ahead and get back to y'all. Good news, everyone. I finally figured out how we can go ahead and migrate our database over to Vercel. But this isn't without struggling and fighting against the GitHub actions for quite a while. But I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what I did to get this set up and also prove that all my database tables and everything else are there. So let's go ahead and hop into Vim. I'll show you what I set up so we can go ahead and have different environments on one single database. Then I'll also go ahead and show you what I had to change in our GitHub action to go ahead and make sure all of our database changes are actually persisted on our Vercel database. So let's hop into Vim. What we need to do is we needed to go into our source and then DB, and inside of our schemas, we need to set something up that I called env schema. So here you can go ahead and see that we're going to switch on what environment we're in. But if we're in the case development, we'll go ahead and use the dev schema, which is basically be our local host. If we are inside the production, we'll go ahead and use the prod schema. And then if we are in anything else, which will be basically test, we'll go ahead and use that stage schema. And then we will go ahead and determine which schema we want to use, and then go ahead and use the env schema. If we went into each one of our schema files, let's just open up a random schema file. So for example, users here, instead of saying pg table users, we're going to go ahead and say env schema.table, and this will go ahead and access the specific schema and then table. So for example, whenever we're in dev, it'll go ahead and say dev.users. Whenever we're in prod, it'll say prod.users. This coupled with the changes inside of our GitHub actions, let's take a look what I had to do there. So anytime we do our basically preview, we go ahead and load in the database URL. So here I just went ahead and load in the Vercel one, and then the environment doesn't really matter because whenever we run a migration, it's going to go ahead and run all of them anyway. So it'll recreate everything. So whenever we go ahead and get this to main, it'll go ahead and update all of those. The main things here is that we need to go ahead and I think we don't actually need these echo anymore. I think this might be out of date. So even though we don't need these echoes anymore, we went ahead and installed our Drizzle kit. And then before we actually go ahead and build our artifact, we go ahead and run npm run db migrate, and that'll make sure that all of our stuff is migrated and everything's up to date. So now let's go ahead and open up dbeaver just to prove that the Vercel database is in fact working. So over here instead of our dbeaver, let's go ahead and open up this Vercel db on the side. I'll try to zoom in. We go ahead and go databases and then Vercel db. We can see our schemas, and here we have dev. If we open up dev, you can see we have tables and all of our tables for our cooking app. Same thing inside of prod, we go to tables, we have all of the tables, and then same thing inside of stage, we can go into our tables, have everything. And if we look at the ERD diagram, it should be primarily the same, or not primarily the same, it should be the exact same. So everything is good there. This is in release, everything is looking good. I'm not sure why this is still here. I might need to take a look and figure out what's going on with this. And then if I forgot to get rid of it, I'll just get rid of it. It might have been slightly different different changes in release or something, so I can just push to main or something and fix it. But that is everything working, and now we can go ahead and move on to our next steps of the project. So speaking of next steps, that's probably unfortunately going to be the end of this episode. It took a lot longer for me to produce this than I wanted it to, but sometimes things happen. And then also it went a lot longer than I expected to. Explaining database stuff and how everything works is a little bit more confusing and takes a little bit longer than I was hoping for. So next episode, I'm hoping to get a lot more work done on the actual UI. But with that being said, I do want a good design before we jump into things. Normally I just go ahead and prototype on the fly and just build things, but with a project like this that I want to be very serious and something that I want to be a real world production application that other people use, I want to go into it with a really good design and make sure it has a really good feel. So unfortunately that means I'm probably going to end up having to learn Figma or something. So hopefully that doesn't take too long. I'll try to come up with some cool designs, and next episode hopefully we can go ahead and at least get a top bar working, and then maybe even figure out kind of like a loading page or like a page saying like, hey, this is under construction, check back soon. Then we'll start getting into some of the authentication stuff like that. We're not doing anything crazy. We're not doing next auth or anything like that. We're not going to have Google login. It's just going to be email, password. You're good to go. We will use Stripe down the road, but I'm not too concerned about that either. So I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I'm going to go ahead and continue thinking about what I want to go ahead and name this application. If you guys also have ideas for the domain, go ahead and drop them down below. I'll kind of think about them, might riff off of them. But again, I appreciate you all for watching, especially if you got to this point. Super exciting project here. I'm super excited about it. Hope you're super excited about it. If you did enjoy, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Everything helps out with the YouTube algorithm. And with that being said, y'all, this has been Ethan, or Unknown Coder, your favorite underqualified senior software engineer, and I'll see you guys in the next video.